Looking back as the bull market turns 10, investors celebrating massive surges in some of America's biggest names. What's behind the run-up and who could it help in a White House run? Our business pros are all over the big anniversary. And could a new plan from Democrat presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren bring the bull run down? From Amazon to Google to Facebook, why she's pitching to break them up. And coaching Cohen, Republicans want to know if that's what staffers of House Intel Chair Adam Schiff were doing ahead of Michael Cohen's testimony. Will there be fallout from it, or is there nothing to it? Former Whitewater Independent Counsel Ken Starr is on it. Then to a new controversy surrounding Democrat Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, what she just said about President Obama that may not sit well with her party. All that, and is NOCO going back to being up to no good? Senate Armed Services Committee Republican Mike Rounds is here, and so are two very special guests. The American journalist back home after being held captive in Venezuela. He tells his incredible story here and only here. And Parkland dad Andrew Pollack, forever on a mission to keep kids safe after his daughter Meadow was gunned down in last year's horrific school shooting. Today, he wants us to meet this Meadow, who just graduated from puppy to protector. A lot to get to, so let's get to it. Cavuto Live starts right now. A big miss on jobs as the bull market turns 10. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Asman in for Neil Cavuto. We are breaking down the good and the not so good with Fox Business Network's Susan Lee. Hi, Susan.
Hey there, David. Yeah, what a decade it's been. Forged during the depths of the global financial crisis. The longest bull market in history turns 10 today. And you can thank 3 rounds of bond buying, QE, and a twist as well. Markets have quadrupled since hitting bottom on March 9th, 2009. The Dow and the S&P 500 both up 300%, while the NASDAQ has outperformed during this period, rallying over 400%. And yes, it has been a decade of tech with the emergence of Facebook, Netflix, and Amazon. So it's not surprising that the best performing stock over the past 10 years, Apple, followed up by something a little surprising, Boeing, also United Health and Visa, all up 1,000% and more during that period. Now, this bull market has taken place under 2 presidencies, and the gains under Obama, as you see there with the green line, extended by President Trump with his business-friendly tax cuts and also deregulation.
The economy is very, very strong. If you look at the stock market over the last few months, it's been great. And certainly since my election, it's up getting close to 50%, the stock market. So we're obviously very happy with that.
But you see, bull markets don't usually last 10 years, and the sharp drop in December shows there are investor concerns questioning when the good times will end. February's disappointing jobs report really didn't help, as a slowdown in the rest of the world might be starting to weigh on the U.S. So 2 important things to watch for this year, for the markets at least: interest rates, which affects pretty much every aspect of the U.S. economy, and trade talks between the world's 2 largest economies, China and the U.S. David?
All right. Thank you very much, Susan. She's going to be joining the panel. President Trump touting soaring stocks under his watch, but Democrats say it started under Barack Obama's watch. So who gets the credit for the bull market, and can it keep going? Here to discuss, Benchmark Investments managing partner Kevin Kelly, Walser Wealth Management President Rebecca Walser, Forbes media editor-in-chief Steve Forbes, and Susan Lee is back with us. She's right here as well. So, Steve, whose bear bull market is it anyway?
It's everyone's bull market. It began in March of 2009 when the regulators got off the back of the banks in terms of forcing them to artificially mark down their capital. Companies have gotten their acts together. And then the last 2 years, deregulation and tax cuts have really given it a boost.
Well, Rebecca, the great thing about what we've had in the past couple of years is that it's based on real economic growth. So often during the Obama era, we would get some lousy economic stats, but the market would keep going up because of other things that were happening.
Yeah, I would give that credit to the Fed and monetary policy and QE 1, 2, and 3. But also, I would definitely say that if you look at Obama, his 8 years, we had average GDP of 1.5%. His last year, we had 1.6. And when Trump came into office, his first budget said 2.3, and he hit 2.3. So I think there's a very clear dichotomy of Obama versus President Trump. Real bull market coming on strong with President Trump.
Kevin, who gets credit?
Yeah, I actually think the Fed gets credit because they started it. I mean, they went into the market, they artificially suppressed interest rates, so people went into riskier assets. And so if we look at how you grow an economy, there's two levers you pull: monetary policy and fiscal policy. And so you saw monetary policy during, Barack Obama's administration, and then you saw fiscal policy during President Trump's. And so the Fed is really dictating the market as going forward, because we saw them capitulate in, 6 weeks after they raised rates in December. And that's why you've seen the recovery in the market. And so we're on a fragile economy right now that needs more fiscal policy to guide us going forward to continue to grow.
Well, it's true that there are some questions about what's happening, Susan, with the economy. Yesterday, we got a big question in terms of why the jobs growth rate was so low compared to expectations. We were expecting 180,000 new jobs. We only got 20,000 new jobs. However, the market ended up kind of flat. It didn't really sink as a result of those.
Well, wage growth was pretty good. The fastest wage gains that we've seen in 10 years. So that means Americans still have money in their wallets. And this might be a sign of the stretchiness of this bull market run, because are we at full employment? I mean, are there that many more jobs to add at this point? I think there are some positives to take away, but yes, there are some concerns as well.
And Steve, we got to remember during the Obama, I'm glad that the market went up under the Obama administration. However, it was the slowest recovery since the Great Depression. We haven't had a recovery from a recession. It was a bad recession in 2008, 2009, but it didn't have to be such a slow recovery, because the president at that time raised tax rates. He increased the number of regulations, and that slowed business growth, right?
It did indeed. And one of the things to remember is a big chunk of the stock market, bull market, was financial engineering. Companies buying in stock, borrowing and buying in stock. The number of listed companies, half of what it was a generation ago. So big companies did well. But if you look until recently, smaller companies, which is really the juice for this economy, provides 2/3 of the new job formation, was one of the most awful periods in American history, starting to recover. So this was big company bull market. But for the economy until recently, not so good.
And Rebecca, it took the market 3 years to recover, to get back to levels before the recession when President Obama was in power. The day after President Trump was elected, the market began to take off, and it went up 7,000 points in a year.
Yeah.
So it's clear the business community took the election of President Trump as a huge positive for the economy.
I call it the Trump bump. It was funny. I was watching the election returns on Fox Business, and the futures were diving because they had priced in Hillary winning, and they weren't sure what is this guy going to win? What is he going to do? And then all of a sudden, when they started looking at it, they started going back up, and the very next day, obviously, it was huge. Obviously, President Trump, I think, has been an amazing. This is the president we needed for this economy at this time in history.
Hey, Carl Icahn went home to start trading.
Yes,
he saw that President Trump was going to win. He's like, oh, well, this is business friendly.
That's right.
I'm going to start buying some companies.
Well, there is one thing that is not necessarily business friendly. That's the trade policies. A lot of folks in business are complaining about the tariffs, complaining that it's costing U.S. consumers and U.S. businesses a lot of money. On the other hand, you got a strong economy, you got a strong market. Doesn't that help us with the trade talks that we're having with China right now?
Well, the problem with the trade talks is we're actually having negotiations with a lot of allies, and they're not pleased with this administration, especially with the negotiating tactics that have taken place, when we look at Canada, when we look at Europe. But I think the important thing when we actually dissect what's happening in the market, the non-cyclicals and the defensives are doing better. Utilities did exceptionally well last week. If we look at real estate investment trusts, they're outperforming the market this year. So everyone's worried about the slowing economy and getting more defensive because of trade and tariffs.
But Steve, staying with the trade talks themselves, the fact that we have such a strong economy and that the Chinese economy has been very weak, their stock market's been decimated, it's kind of gives us a position of arguing from strength, doesn't it?
It's the economy, but I think we could have gotten things we needed from China in terms of abuses. by doing what we're finally doing now, going after specific individuals, companies, banks, sanctioning them. ZTE a few months ago, Trump spared them.
Big telecom company from China.
He could have put them out of business by denying them parts from Qualcomm and others. And so that's how you get their attention, not putting tariffs on each other. Tariffs are sales taxes, and that's what is overhanging the market. If you could have all these trade disputes, and one is coming up on autos, where we're threatening to put tariffs on every auto part and every automobile around the world, called Section 232 if you want to impress people at a cocktail party. But if you could just clear those out of the way, you'd see the market go up another 15-20%.
Susan, very quickly, what's the latest on the trade talks? Are we making real progress? Because you keep getting mixed reports.
Yeah, well, yesterday we've been hearing that it looks like the Chinese have not penciled in this meeting face-to-face with President Trump between Chinese President Xi Jinping. And I think in this trade dispute right now, the question is about pain tolerance. How long does China have? Because they are going through a world of pain.
This panel is so good. We got to do it again in the next hour. What do you say? All right?
Hey.
More coffee.
Do we get time and a half?
Yeah.
I'm going to read about Section 232.
Don't worry, you'll get time and a half. Well, did Democrats coach Michael Cohen before his public testimony, and did he just get caught in yet another lie to Congress? Former Whitewater Independent Counsel Ken Starr is next. Michael Cohen under scrutiny for meeting with House Intel Committee Chair Adam Schiff's staff ahead of his public testimony and for possibly lying to Congress again. Fox News correspondent Jillian Turner has details. Hi, Jillian.
Good morning, David. So Fox News was first to report yesterday that Democratic staff from the House Intelligence Committee met with Michael Cohen 4 times for a total of over 10 hours prior to his public testimony last week. Though it's somewhat customary for committee staff to meet with witnesses prior to hearings, Republican members of House Intel immediately took issue with this news. Mike Turner blasting Chairman Adam Schiff in a letter. He wrote, "This level of coaching of a witness is highly unprofessional and inappropriate, and any claim to the contrary is complete nonsense." To the Chairman Schiff liked to say, according to another Republican member, Wenstrup, that it's common for these things to happen, and he does not believe it to be true. Defending the pre-hearing prep sessions, Schiff fired back, quote, "Despite this professed outrage by Republicans, it's completely appropriate to conduct proper sessions and allow witnesses to review their prior testimony before the committee interviews them. Such sessions are a routine part of every serious investigation around the country, including congressional investigations." Now, sources told Fox News these meetings with Cohen covered a wide array of topics, including the National Enquirer's catch and kill policy that covered up President Trump's affair with porn star Stormy Daniels, the owner of that publication, David Pecker, and even President Trump's alleged alternating inflation and undervaluation of his own assets in official documents. Michael Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, said not so. He insisted yesterday the meetings between House Intel staff and Cohen focused very narrowly on the line-by-line text of testimony he had submitted to the House Intelligence Committee in 2017. David, back to you.
All right, Jillian, thank you very much. Well, from pardoning pressure to allegations of private coaching, could all of this signal more legal trouble for Michael Cohen? Here to discuss it is former Whitewater Independent Counsel, author of Contempt, a memoir of the Clinton investigation. Judge Ken Starr joins us now. So, Judge, first of all, what do you think of a congressional witness who keeps lying, apparently, in front of Congress?
A very bad practice. People go to jail for that sort of thing.
But, I mean, what kind of a witness, as a prosecutor, if you bring up a witness who continues to lie, doesn't that mean that part of your evidentiary case is falling apart?
It certainly affects credibility. And credibility is all important in life. But also in this kind of situation, for Congress to so trumpet, for the House of Representatives to so trumpet Michael Cohen means that his credibility is so terribly important. And I think what has happened with these 10 hours, which seems to me like a lot, the chairman says, well, this is just the kind of practice that we typically engage in. Well, I think we need to know that. Is that really true? And also, if it really is fact-finding, why isn't the Republican staff there as well? If you're really after the truth, then the appearances become all the more important, that we are on a quest for truth, not to score partisan points, which is what a lot of what's going on appears to be about. It appears to be about the 2020 election.
Well, you have several. What's confusing, I think, to a lot of folks is the fact that you have so many investigations going on. You have some Republican investigations. You have a lot of Democrat investigations now since they won the House. You have these separate tracks, but let's focus on Mueller for once. Your investigation as a special counsel led to an impeachment. Will this one lead to an impeachment as well, do you think, the Mueller investigation?
Well, it's unlikely. If we go back to why did we hire Robert Mueller? Why was he appointed back in May of what am I trying to say? May of 2017.
2017.
Right. And when we go back to that appointing document by Rod Rosenstein, what we see it's to investigate collusion, and then also looking at the testimony of James Comey from March of 2017. And what that tells us is this should be all about collusion. Now, since that time, let's leave the Paul Manafort prosecution aside. David, what we've seen are these two major indictments about a year ago against Russian individuals and Russian organizations. Not only is there not one word about collusion in those very detailed indictments, but when you read about it and then reflect on those indictments, they're sort of contraindications. The Russians had this operation. There's no question about that. It was lavishly financed. It was also very vicious. On the very same day, these operatives financed a pro-Trump rally and an anti-Trump rally in New York. That tells you a lot, doesn't it? Now, are you going to be colluding with someone while you're holding an anti-Trump rally? Not one word in those indictments goes to collusion. So in light of that, I think what was found along the way was Paul Manafort's crimes, and so those were prosecuted. But I think what we're likely to hear is that there is no substantial evidence of actual crimes in connection with the campaign.
Well, if in fact Bob Mueller's charge was to specifically look at Russian interference in our election, wouldn't it be fair to look at what the Democrats were doing as well? Because certainly there were a lot of contacts between the Clinton campaign and organizations like Fusion GPS, which relied on a lot of Russian interference in their attacks on Donald Trump.
Well, all these things should be looked into. You're absolutely right. The question is, who should be the cop on the beat? Bob Mueller was appointed because of the implications, whether they were well-founded or not, against the President of the United States. In terms of the Democrats, yes, the Justice Department, the United States Attorney's Office should investigate credible claims of wrongdoing.
Now, your investigation veered away from Whitewater, which was your initial charge. I think it was the Justice Department that asked you to investigate Monica Lewinsky and that whole thing. You regretted having done that. But Mr. Mueller's investigation has strayed a lot as well. A lot of what Michael Cohen is charged with has nothing to do with his initial charge. Do you think he strayed too far quickly?
I don't know that he's actually strayed. In fact, I would object to your premise. We had add-ons, and it may very well be that what we don't know, David, is has he had additional things added to his plate, because he's an officer of the Justice Department. I had things added to my plate, and the same may be true with Bob Mueller.
Very quickly, if it wasn't for Monica Lewinsky, would you have indicted Hillary Clinton?
Would I have been? I discussed this in the book. We simply did not have enough evidence, admissible evidence, to bring that prosecution. But we did have a draft indictment. It was an elaborate indictment. It was supported by a prosecution memo, and we said we don't have enough evidence. Susan McDougal, as one, was unwilling to testify.
Judge Ken Starr, good to see you. Thank you very much, sir. Before they vote on the national emergency over the border wall, several Senate Republicans asking the White House where the money's coming from. A key player in that debate, Senator Steve Daines, joins us next. The White House releasing new stats this week showing illegal border crossings are soaring and saying that's why it's a true national emergency. But some Republican senators want to know exactly where the money for the wall is going to come from. To Senate Appropriations Committee member Steve Daines. Good to see you, Senator. Thank you for joining us. Do you have an answer to that? Do you know where appropriations for the wall will be coming from?
Well, David, I can tell you, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, but importantly as a senator from Montana, we have a national crisis. We need to see more members of Congress spending time on the southern border. I was down the southern border from 2:30 a.m. until 8 a.m. a month ago, shoulder to shoulder with our Border Patrol. Saw firsthand the flood of illegal immigrants coming across that Rio Grande Valley sector right near McAllen, Texas. But the issue for Montana is the illegal drugs. The meth is killing us in this state, literally corner to corner in our state. It's breaking apart families, our communities. In fact, our meth seizures in Montana doubled by our U.S. Marshal 2 times year over year. This is a crisis, and that is why I support President Trump, what he's trying to do here to secure the southern border.
By the way, we're seeing on the right side of the screen is video from your trip to the border, so we're getting a look at what you saw. And what we all saw this week were some really bothersome, worrisome reports. The Wall Street Journal had a big piece on exactly how there's been an explosion of immigrant families being detained at the border. There's one quote from a Border Patrol official saying the system is well beyond capacity, remains at the breaking point. I mean, it is clear that there is an emergency at the border. However, a lot of your fellows in the Appropriations Committee, including the chair, Richard Shelby, is concerned that wall funding, despite the emergency at the border, is going to be taking away from some of the military projects in their own state. Can you reassure them somehow that that won't happen?
Well, look, we need to be able to do both things at once. As a member of the Appropriations Committee, we will set aside a new set of appropriations beginning October 1st, the new fiscal year. We need to do both. This shouldn't be an either-or discussion. We can do both. We may have to delay some timing on parts of the funding, but we can do and we must do both. As you saw the report that came out of the Homeland Security Department, 76,000 illegals were captured in February. This is spinning out of control. What's happening, though, is as these illegals are flooding across the border, 85% of those apprehensions occur between the ports of entry, not at the ports of entry. But what's happening with all the resources having to focus on these illegals flooding across our southern border, it's leaving these Mexican cartels the ability to flood us with illegal drugs. And it's methamphetamines that's destroying parts of our state here in Montana. I was at a treatment center in Montana just 2 weeks ago. These are moms now addicted to meth with children. It's the #1 cause of addiction for moms is no longer alcohol, it's meth. This Mexican cartel meth is 95% potent. 10 years ago, it was the homegrown laboratory meth, about 25% potent. So it's much more potent, much more dangerous, much more addictive. It's lower in price now because these Mexican cartels. We need to stay focused on this crisis. The president is exactly right in what he's doing here to keep our country safe.
Well, and, you know, they say listen to the experts, and the people on the border are saying exactly that. I mean, not only do they have the stats, but they have the heart-rending stories of the border officials are just beyond their means. We are stretched beyond the point at which we can control the border, and that's what's really frightening. And it is an emergency. We do need something. A lot of Americans want the wall in addition to some other means of securing the border. However, what do you say to those senators who are concerned that you may be robbing from Peter to pay Paul because there's only so much money to go around that has been appropriated? Will some money be taken from state projects, military projects that are of great concern to the citizens of those states?
So we're actively engaged with the White House to look for what projects could be at risk. But here's the reality. We're already 6 months into the fiscal year. So we're halfway through the year because the federal fiscal year begins on October 1st. So much of these dollars are already appropriated to support these projects for military construction. And so we're working with the White House to ensure we can protect the most important projects as well as deliver on this national emergency. These illegal immigrants, in fact, in the Rio Grande Valley sector, just last week captured 7,000 in that short 277-mile sector that I was on, those Border Patrol agents. And those agents will tell you, to a man and to a woman, as we spent the night with those brave men and women who are doing a great job down there, they said, we need a physical barrier. Yep, we need more boots on the ground. Yes, we need more technology. But they said without a physical barrier, we can't get the job done. And when we have put physical barriers in place, we've seen 95% reductions. So when you look at the totality of the cost of this country, as it relates to what drugs are doing, it relates to violent crime increases because of these drugs, what these illegal immigrants do in terms of our systems in our country, there's a great return on investment to invest in securing that southern border.
Senator Shelby quickly wants a list of the projects from which money will be taken for building the wall before the Senate votes on the emergency measure of the president's. Do you think a list like that can be provided before the vote?
Well, a list would be helpful because we also have to protect these very important missions of military construction. Right. One of the president's most important responsibilities is to provide for the national defense. And so he understands that. And so we can get to about $4 billion quite easily at the moment before we get to 5.7.
I'm sorry, we got to break it at that. We're up against a hard break. Thank you very much for being here. Best of luck to you. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. Bull market that we celebrate today started under President Obama, but if it keeps going, could it help President Trump win in 2020? Joining me now to debate it, Independent Women's Forum's Nan Hayworth, former Democrat Congressional Press Secretary Rochelle Ritchie, and Trump 2020 Advisory Board member Jenna Ellis. Good to see you all, ladies. Thank you for being here. So, Nan, we know that President Obama had the slowest recovery since the Great Depression.
Right.
He raised taxes and increased regulations. A lot of people said it was the wrong thing. However, the reboot of the market began under his watch. He won in 2012 re-election, partly as a result of what the market was doing. So is the same thing going to happen for the re-election of Donald Trump?
Well, I think obviously a continued bull market will help President Trump, but I think we have reasons to anticipate that it will continue. When we think about the Obama bull market, a lot of its energy was derived from the fact that interest rates, the Fed started quantitative easing, effectively keeping interest rates incredibly low. So there was no place to go but the markets, basically, and that certainly helped the markets. President Trump was given runway by the fact that the economic recovery, such as it was so slow under President Obama. That gave him an opportunity to, with deregulation and taxes, really help the economy grow. That does help markets. And in addition, the Fed has now decided, Jerome Powell has decided that he can be a little more dovish about interest rate hikes right now. That's a positive for the market, and I think that will help President Trump. Deregulation and tax cuts are growing the economy. Good for the economy, good for the markets.
All right. Jerome Powell, by the way, is the head of the Federal Reserve. They're the ones that set the base interest rate that leads other interest rates to go up or down. Rochelle, the day after President Trump was elected president, the market began to go up, and it's been going up ever since. It's kind of stalled at around 25,000 on the Dow, but it went up 7,000 points right after he was elected. I mean, there does seem to be a connection between the economic policies, or at least the opinion of the business community and the investment community about his benefits for the economy. Can he use that to win re-election?
Well, look, I think that the economy is obviously going to be a strong talking point for Donald Trump and for the Republicans in general. I mean, we can't ignore the fact that it looks really good when you look at the unemployment rate, when you look at job growth, things look really great. But I think that's going to be a strong talking point for the Republicans. What the Democrats I see doing is countering that with the fact of his tax plan and how that has affected Americans. When you look at the tax plan, you have 49% in a poll right before the midterm elections that say that his tax plan has not had any sort of financial benefit to them. So I think that Democrats are going to run on the entirety of, looking at the tax cuts, saying this did not help you. He's cutting taxes to billionaires and millionaires, and I think they're going to turn it back over and focusing on health care, because right before the midterm elections, health care trumped, no pun intended, but health care trumped the economy, which normally does not happen. So I think it was about 41% of people said that health care was the biggest thing. So Republicans are going to be focused on the economy. Right. Democrats are going to be focused on health care.
Jenna, do you think the Republicans could have done more in the last election to make the connection between the booming economy, this extraordinary jobs number that we have, which is, the first time in my life where you've had more jobs available than people looking for jobs, they didn't make that connection strong enough between the tax cuts and the effect it had on the economy. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think that the GOP really needs to hit that very strongly, and I think that President Trump definitely did, and he came out very strong. He's talked about that quite a bit, and I think what Republicans need to do in 2020 specifically is to point out how progressive and socialist the Democratic agenda genuinely is, and talk about that conservatism and the founding principles of America are genuinely capitalism when we're talking about the economy. We don't want single-payer health care. We want options. We want everything that's in the best interest of families, of the individual, and to make our own choices and not have big government in Washington making those decisions. And so drawing not only the connection of everything that President Trump has done that's been in the benefit of every American, whether or not they voted for him, but also how his continued policies and conservatism generally not only is constitutional, but absolutely in the benefit of America.
But, Nan, it's a little early to be outlining a counterattack to Democrats when Democrats, I don't think, have settled on what their economic policy is, how far to the left it'll be.
Very true, but they are running a great risk. They do seem largely to be stampeding to the left. It'll be interesting to see what happens when Vice President Biden likely joins the race, because then the aura of the Obama era and, of course, his relative centrism will attract a lot of Democrats who feel disaffected now. But I think Rochelle's point about health care is well taken, and I think the Republicans do, Jenna's as well, the Republicans do have to, speaking as a doctor, emphasize over and over again, and do it now, how important it is that what they offer for health care, they will be protecting patients with pre-existing conditions. They will be offering Americans more affordable care and give them quality and choice. That's crucial.
Rochelle, I know you tend to be with the moderate wing of the Democrat Party, and it must concern you that so many of the people who do veer towards socialism in the Democratic Party are kind of leading the charge these days. When do you think you begin to see some of that pulled back by somebody like Biden?
You know, I don't really know if they're leading the charge or if they're just really leading the headlines, because of the things that they say are so, you know, out of the norm of what we're used to hearing. So I really think that, you know, when you hear Ocasio-Cortez and others, I think they're leading the headlines, but I don't think they're leading the party at all.
But you do have someone like Nancy Pelosi who's come out and is actually backing someone like Representative Omar and just making kind of excuses. So you have the acknowledged leader of the Democratic Party.
Anti-Semitic?
Yeah. And
but she also put forth a resolution, though.
But however, but it didn't specifically call her out.
We're going to be talking more about that coming up.
But that's the leader of the Democratic Party. I like the idea of Biden coming in. I think that is going to bring us back a little bit more to the middle. And I've said this already right before we came, that I believe a Biden-Harris ticket is a winning ticket.
Okay, ladies, we'll see you in the next hour as well. Thank you very much. Well, fresh off of her controversial comments about Israel, Democrat Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is stirring up a new controversy over her remarks about former President Obama. And the U.S. journalist detained in Venezuela is now safely back in the United States, and he is speaking to us, and only us. That's next. As more protests break out in Venezuela today, the U.S. journalist who was detained by the Venezuelan government is finally back home in Florida. Cody Weddle, we appreciate you being here. Thank you for joining us. This is an exclusive interview, so we appreciate that. Cody, tell us how the arrest went down and what happened afterwards.
Well, it was Wednesday morning. It was about 6:30 in the morning. 6:30 in the morning. I was still asleep, and my doorbell rang. I actually thought it was the waterman delivering water. We get regularly bottles of water there, and I opened the door because I thought it was him. I have a gate and also a door, so I had opened the door, but the gate was still shut. And when I opened that door, I saw three armed men. They had rifles. They had handguns, and then there was also a woman there as well, and they gave me an order, and that order said I was under investigation for espionage, for extracting military equipment, and also for treason to Venezuela, and they ended up raiding my apartment.
Now, you have been there since 2014 covering the events for news organizations. I mean, is there anything that you think triggered the arrest? What was responsible for it, or did they tell you?
They didn't tell me specifically, but it started to become clear once I was taken to their headquarters. These were military counterintelligence officials, and I was later taken to their headquarters and held for many hours. Most of the time I had a ski mask over my head and was just in a room by myself. And when they started interrogating me, it started to become clear that they were interested in some reporting I had done about this current state of Venezuela's security forces. Of course, right now we have an unprecedented political situation there where we have one president, and we have two presidents basically, and one is trying to convince the armed forces to defect against the other and now support him. And I did reporting that showed that the rank and file members of Venezuela's security forces are suffering the effects of this economic crisis, of the humanitarian crisis. They're paid measly salaries. And I spoke to many members, a few members at least, of the security forces anonymously, and they all said that the rank and file are ready to see change in the country, but that they can't rise up in any way because the top generals remain with Maduro, and there is intense surveillance by people like these counterintelligence services. So they started asking me the contacts I had in the military, contacts I had with all types of security forces. So I think, although they never said it explicitly, I think that was perhaps the reason this all happened.
Did they want specific names, and did you give those names to them?
They did want specific names of people I had interviewed. I didn't give any names. I didn't have those names memorized. So I didn't hand over any information that would have compromised that, and didn't reveal any information that they didn't get from my phone. They went through all of the contents of my phone, my computer, but I didn't give them any extra information. No.
God bless you. I'm sure their families are very appreciative of you not giving them names. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Cuban infiltration in the security forces of Venezuela. We know the relationship with Cuba's communist government and Venezuela's socialist government has been strong ever since Chavez and before. Did you see any indication that there were Cubans involved in your detention?
Well, that was one of the first questions I got when I arrived at the Miami airport. Were the accents that I heard of the people who arrested me, were they Cuban or Venezuelan? And I heard only Venezuelan accents. I didn't run into any Cubans there or hear any Cuban accents in the where I was arrested. But certainly that's we know that Cuba has been involved in the security, especially of President Maduro, and in general the security in the armed forces in Venezuela. But it's something that is very vague, and we don't have a lot of information about that or to what extent it exists in the country.
Cody, we only have about 30 seconds left, but the country has 2 million% inflation right now. It's just hard to imagine. I've never known a government survive in hyperinflation like that. How long do you think the Maduro government can last?
Well, it's hard to tell. He survived intense protests in 2017, but this definitely feels different, especially with U.S. sanctions on the oil sector. That will be huge, and it will have a huge impact on what he can do and the economy. But I think a transition is probably coming. It's hard to tell, but this is an unprecedented situation there for President Maduro, and it's really hard to see how he hangs on for much longer. So I would expect something at least to happen within the next year or a few months.
Well, we're very happy that you weren't harmed by this experience. You seem in fine shape, so we're glad that you will be on to your next venture. Thank you for joining us, Cody. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Meanwhile, the latest on the tornadoes all over the country next. As more protests break out in Venezuela today, the U.S. journalist who was detained by the Venezuelan government is finally back home in Florida. Cody Weddle, we appreciate you being here. Thank you for joining us. This is an exclusive interview, so we appreciate that. Cody, tell us how the arrest went down and what happened afterwards.
Well, it was Wednesday morning. It was about 6:30 in the morning. 6:30 in the morning. I was still asleep, and my doorbell rang. I actually thought it was the waterman delivering water. We get regularly bottles of water there. And I opened the door because I thought it was him. I have a gate and also a door. So I had opened the door, but the gate was still shut. And when I opened that door, I saw three armed men. They had rifles, they had handguns, and then there was also a woman there as well. And they gave me an order, and that order said I was under investigation for espionage, for extracting military equipment, and also for treason to Venezuela. And they ended up raiding my apartment.
Now, you have been there since 2014 covering the events for news organizations. I mean, is there anything that you think triggered the arrest? What was responsible for it, or did they tell you?
They didn't tell me specifically, but it started to become clear once I was taken to their headquarters. These were military counterintelligence officials, and I was later taken to their headquarters and held for many hours. Most of the time I had a ski mask over my head and was just in a room by myself. And when they started interrogating me, it started to become clear that they were interested in some reporting I had done about this current state of Venezuela's security forces. Of course, right now we have an unprecedented political situation there where we have one president, and we have two presidents basically, and one is trying to convince the armed forces to defect against the other and now support him. And I did reporting that showed that the rank and file members of Venezuela's security forces are suffering the effects of this economic crisis, of the humanitarian crisis. They're paid measly salaries. And I spoke to many members, a few members at least, of the security forces anonymously, and they all said that the rank and file are ready to see change in the country, but that they can't rise up in any way because the top generals remain with Maduro, and there is intense surveillance by people like these counterintelligence services. So they